the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey had always been kind of a guiding light. Whenever things weren't going the way they were supposed to, I would go back to those fundamentals and adjusting to those 7 habits to make sure I was living the kind of life and being the type of leader that would lead to greater effectiveness. During COVID, we had the opportunity and the money to look at a way to do social emotional learning more effectively as we came out of COVID. The Leader in Me, which is a offshoot of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, was one of those curriculums that we were able to use and bring for professional development to our staff. The first year I was here, we did the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People training for all of our staff. The next year we did the Speed of Trust training. And then in the third year, we did 4DX, the 4 Disciplines of Execution. 4DX was really building upon what I'd always used as a driving force for myself personally and professionally, which was those 7 habits.
This is the Engaging Leadership Show, where we uncover the stories and strategies behind successful educational leadership. In today's episode, we go deep in one superintendent's journey to be able to build systems for culture change from very, very basic things within the district, starting out from attendance, social emotional learning, towards building then a data-driven culture within all of his staff. Today, we're going to talk about what methods he used, get into the nitty-gritty of some of the challenges that he spoke about, and ultimately how we're in the midst of that journey today in this district. So all of this and more in today's episode of the Engaging Leadership Show. Today's guest is a superintendent of a district where the largest high school has consistently ranked amongst the top 25% of high schools in California. This district has also innovated greatly in the areas of CTE and dual enrollment. So it's a great privilege to have with us in the studio today, Ed Pelfrey. He's the superintendent of Sonora Union High School District. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So Ed, tell us a little bit more about Sonora as a district and as a community.
Sonora Union High School District serves an area in Tuolumne County where Yosemite National Park is. We are about the same latitude as San Jose and about 2.5 hours to the east, depending on what the traffic looks like leaving San Jose. It's a county of 50,000 people. We are the largest high school district in the county with just over 1,000 students. We have a comprehensive high school, which is Sonora High School. We have a continuation high school, which is Dario Casina High School, which was just named a model continuation school by the CDE. And we have Ted Bird Independent Study School. And we have Sonora Adult Ed School. We're right in the downtown of Sonora, which is a city of about 5,000 people with a gold rush era downtown. Some beautiful buildings. We're well known for our red church that people come to take pictures of and stand in the middle of Washington Street and take pictures. It's a beautiful school. It's over 100 years old. And it's a place where generations after generations have come to school and take a great deal of pride in their local high school.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. And when you think about the community and the people that form the area around you, what are some of the key characteristics? Is there any particular profession that is popular?
We're a rural county where also most of the acreage of the county is national forest. One of the large employers is the federal government. The largest private employer is Adventist Health, which is our local hospital. Then it's followed by logging, and with SPI, Sierra Pacific Industries, their mills are large employers. And then tourism is another major industry here in the county.
You've been a superintendent now coming to almost 5 years. And when you think back about the changes that you've brought to the district, one of the systems that we've spoken about was the executional discipline and building that into almost like an operating system for the way that this district is run. Talk to me a little bit more about that, and how do you think about just running the district on day to day and keeping progress always top of mind?
Personally, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey had always been kind of a guiding light. Whenever things weren't going the way they were supposed to, I would go back to those fundamentals and adjusting to those 7 habits to make sure I was living the kind of life and being the type of leader that would lead to greater effectiveness. During COVID, we had the opportunity and the money to look at a way to do social emotional learning more effectively as we came out of COVID. And the Leader in Me, which is a offshoot of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, was one of those curriculums that we were able to use and bring for professional development to our staff. The first year I was here, we did the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People training for all of our staff. The next year we did the Speed of Trust training. And then in the third year, we did 40X, the 4 disciplines of execution. So 40X was really building upon what I'd always used as a driving force for myself personally and professionally, which was those 7 habits. 40X then said, the problem isn't the plans we make, it's how we execute the plans we make. With 40X, there are 4 disciplines of execution, and then these are the keys. It's not making plans, it's executing on those plans. And that the first piece of that learning was to find a wildly important goal, or what they call a WIG, and reducing the number of goals we have to make sure we can achieve the goals that we think are most important. And then acting on lead measures. This has been, I think, a big change for us, is this focus on data to drive instruction and to drive change in our district. And then keeping compelling scoreboards of that data, and also then creating a cadence of accountability so that we're frequently going back to that data to see what we've done, if it's effective, and then beginning that cycle of reevaluation to change and meet goals.
So it was really starting out with the weeks, or was it wildly important goals?
Wildly important goals.
And setting those in place. And once you have those goals, starting to figure out what those lead measures are. So rather than lagging measures of success, you want to find out what is going to drive your success, and to be able to then put that all into some kind of scorecard that you can see on a day-to-day, week-to-week, term-to-term measure, and then have that cadence of accountability where you do review the scoreboard and have individuals who are responsible for different parts of that. Am I summarizing that?
Yeah, you are. And I think the important part about the scoreboard is that it has to be created by the people who are working on the achievement. Scoreboards that people make themselves hold greater motivation for them. That was really important, that we chose a way that focused all of our staff at every level, from administration to certificated staff to classified staff, to try and accomplish that goal. The first time we came through with that, the goal was increasing attendance. And everybody's able to take a piece of that, from transportation and food service to campus security to teachers and counselors. That was a really great goal for us to have when we first launched off. Coming back together and reviewing that data on a regular basis was really important and motivational for our whole.
I want to dig into that first week that you guys had, because I think there's a really good leadership lesson in that. It's the first time you're trying out something new. You're also relatively new to the district as a superintendent. So you had to get a bunch of buy-in from everyone around this week. How did everyone settle on that as the one thing to address? And how did you come up with the lead measures that was relevant to everyone who was working in the district?
If I would have asked the teaching staff particularly, what was the main issue with students, it would have been student behavior. And they didn't feel the student behavior was being addressed consistently and effectively. But the administrative staff, led by our principal, Karen Sells, at the Comprehensive High School, and her 2 associate principals, Stacy Cruzy and Will Sarkeesian, along with our student support coordinator, which is Brian Craig, they had really dug into that. I think it was our learning from 40X that led us to MTSS, where they were putting together a great MTSS system to deal with student behavior. Our staff had moved beyond that student behavior was the issue. So now when we looked as a staff, we said, what's holding back students from having success? Their answer was attendance. It was natural. This was where the conversation would lead. We're a small district, which in some ways makes things easier, but in other ways, it can lead to a lack of a lot of ideas germinating from new places. They had to be a part of that conversation to buy into attendance being the goal.
Could you give an example of how that trickled down into lead measures and the scoreboard and the metrics for other departments, whether it was food services, transportation, and so on?
Our campus supervisors, one of their goals became how they greeted students and how often they greeted students. So greeting students when they came onto campus and having positive interactions, and they were able to monitor those together and say, hey, I've greeted this many students today. And that is their positive input and their scoreboard to measure. As a measure of that, we have what's called a Staffalty Award, where students vote on their favorite staff or faculty member. Beginning with our 40X training, the next 3 years, all 3 of those Staffalty of the Year have been campus supervisors, because they're the people who are making sure students are doing the right thing on campus, along with our administrators when they're outside of class. They're doing things like checking people's IDs as they go to off campus for lunch, or making sure people are going the right place. But the positive interactions they're having over and over again make them the most popular people on campus, according to our students. That measure played out in many ways that we could see that effect afterwards. Another example, and more core to what the efforts were directly focused on attendance, was staff members greeting students, staff talking to students, just making those connections, because we know that that's the number one driver of student attendance. It takes me back to a WASC accreditation over 20 years ago we had here. And during WASC accreditations, the accreditation team picks out 20 students on campus at random. They choose them and they call in, they start to ask them questions. And I was sitting there and they said, why do you come to school? It was a campus supervisor at the time, one of our former coaches, the father of the new head football coach. His name was Dale Clifton. And he said, Coach Clifton asks where I was when I'm not at school. And he says, we really need you here, and we miss you when you're not here. And there were 4 kids out of 20 that, as that went around, it was the reason they came to school was because Coach Clifton asked them where they were and told them that it was important for them to be at school when they weren't there. And you just think that impact can be the driving force. And so I think with our staff, we express that, and we have a very positive staff. When people start to say, I didn't greet kids at the door before because I just didn't think it was really necessary. For instance, this was just shared with me. Our teacher who will be recognized as our teacher of excellence this year is Brian Millett, and he's a computer science instructor and video game design instructor. And he said, I didn't think that was really necessary. I had great relationships. But when I started going to the front door and greeting kids as they came in, I just realized that everything changed a little bit. Things had always been good in my class, but they got better. So that type of just constant greeting and making kids feel positive, I think, was a big part of what was going on. But that was a lead measure that we were looking at to get to those lag measures. Central to what we were doing was in our offices, we had set up a multi-tiered system of support for attendance, so that there were a dialer going out the first time that a student was absent. After that, it would be a office staff member making a call to home to say, hey, we're wondering where your student is, and we wanted to know it's important to be here. And then stepping that up. So if we have students who are having more absences, that they're meeting with an administrator. And then if it goes beyond that, going to our school attendance review team. And then we have an award-winning school attendance review board at the County Office of Education here that's very collaborative with our site teams. And then it moves up to there. So we saw a lot of success in those areas. We looked at how many students moved from tier 1 to tier 2. Those numbers weren't very high. There hadn't been a concentrated effort on making sure we were doing the tier 1 work first, or that first or that lowest level intervention, before we jumped up to higher levels of intervention, where we're jumping to counselors before we've even made a call home to see what's going on.
Because this was the first time that you were implementing this level of focus on attendance, how did you decide what was good? You had no benchmark. How did you decide this number of greetings are good, this level of attendance improvement is good, we're making progress? How did you work that out with your team?
I believe that whatever you measure moves. We knew that just setting that out there as a goal would cause an increase, regardless of what the actual baseline was. We had attendance rates before COVID, and we hadn't approached those attendance rates after COVID. That's pretty common worldwide. But that was the number I think that we had in mind. We knew that in the 22-23 year that we had an average daily attendance of 86%. And we knew that we still have goals of 95% attendance. And when we finished 23-24, it was 91%. So it was a significant increase in attendance. It was a whole team effort, but really spearheaded by our student support administrator, Stacy Cruzy, and her efforts.
And so you were seeing measurable improvement in the WIG and the metric that you were looking to improve and you built this into a cadence of accountability. Was it like a monthly basis that you were looking at this, or weekly even? How did you build this in?
There was several different cadences of accountability. One of them was our PBIS team was getting together once a month to look at their efforts. I mean, everybody is meeting at different times. So each department was meeting once a month to say, how are we working with our goals? And that would be true of all of our management. We had multiple cycles of accountability for different levels of our organization. Every month, each department would get together and discuss where they were with the lead measures that they were working on. And then also at a different meeting each month, we would bring forward the ADA, or the average daily attendance numbers, to the entire step. So that would always happen once a month. For instance, our PBIS team would consistently work on looking at how we were doing with our PBIS efforts and adjusting on a monthly basis.
How long did you keep attendance as your week? Was it 1 year, 2 years? And what prompted the shift when you did decide to shift?
1 year. And so far, we've seen that success. We just did it for the 23-24 school year, and we kept the things that were working, and now they've become part of our practice. We've taken that one goal, as opposed to taking a multitude of different goals and being exhausted, because you remember from the 4DX training, you also have to keep the whirlwind. The whirlwind is always going, and we all have to serve the whirlwind. It's part of our daily practice. This year, we decided on a goal of using data to drive decision, which is an interesting wig because it almost begs the question. But we needed to make it standard practice at our district. And it started to become that because of the wig in the first place. But now we wanted to extend that, particularly into our strategic plan. In the spring of 2022, we brought together 20 members of the community with 20 members of our staff. And we worked on, with a facilitator, on building a strategic plan, where we took the 20 different things that schools do, everything from teaching math to food service. We ranked those where they are in priority for our strategic plan, as well as building a vision statement and a mission statement. And we hadn't done much. We did this big lift. We've got our goals. We set some metrics, and then we forgot it. We only knew what was at the top. The top then was social emotional learning. The students' social emotional well-being was the goal, which, once again, from 22 to 23, because we made that our focus, we had great success. So we could look at our California Healthy Kids surveys and see that while the rest of the state was declining or was increasing in rates of suicidal ideation and chronic sadness, because of our efforts, we established a wellness center. We had focused intervention curriculum for suicidal ideation. We saw that trend go down over a 5-year period now. So that first year, we had a focus on our highest strategic priority, which was the social emotional wellness, and we saw the change. Now, then we go into the next year and we say, okay, we're probably going to change our main focuses, and we made it to attendance, but we kept all the practices from that first year and made them part of the whirlwind moving forward. In 23-24, that focus on the metrics and on the data that we were pulling from our attendance work really started to make people see and become excited about the idea of data and that they could affect data. And we know, if we go back to pedagogical, what I'm trying to think of is the name of the book, Visible Learning. And it's the guy who wrote Visible Learning,
John
is
Hattie?
Hattie. We'll go all the way back. We're looking at data, and we were having success with data. We know that if you look at Visible Learning by John Hattie, that the key for success is teachers' collective efficacy, that they believe what they can do can affect things. And I think we were starting to make that happen. When we went from social emotional wellness to attendance, both times we see, hey, when we set a goal, we achieve it. So then going into this year, 24-25, we made the focus using data to drive decision-making. And that has started to become a part of that practice. And it came into our strategic plan, where in this last year, I really pushed to the forefront with all my department leads, hey, let's make sure that we have our metrics and that we're focused on those metrics. And I've been really pleasantly surprised with the degree to which they grasp that, moving forward with that focus on using data to drive their decision making.
Oh, that's really interesting. It sounds almost like you had to really streamline the wigs and give a lot of focus to the teams for them to rally around and push in the right direction or in the same direction. And once they started doing that, what it sounds like is you've unlocked one of the keys to teacher self-efficacy, which then has very strong correlations with student success around just providing that baseline of data so that it reinforces teachers in that sense of collective self-efficacy. That's really quite profound. How do you determine when you're done, when you've accomplished a data-driven way of running the district?
I don't know if there's an arrival point, but when we are consistently looking at data and that's what's driving our decisions, I think that's important. I think going back to the reason we've had some success with this is where you have to ride the wave that's already rolling. If we chose goals that weren't in line with what the bulk of our staff didn't feel was appropriate, I don't think we'd have success. But what we looked at was when our staff said, hey, it's attendance. I can teach anybody as long as they're here. Great. Let's continue to ride that wave. We all agree that this is a good thing. So when the data started to come forward, if the data had been highly negative, not that we don't have pockets of data that don't need great improvement, but when we're looking at that success, people are eager to look at data rather than starting off with, here's the place where we're doing the worst. Let's focus on that data. Now people aren't afraid to step into areas where there's challenges to build success. I don't know if I know a point where I'll say we've achieved it. For instance, we just had our WASC accreditation. And one of the things that they brought out was all of our staff talking about data. Without being asked about data, they're talking about WASC now has a rubric at the end of their reports. And vision and leadership were the exceeding standards areas for us. And I think that shows that people are looking at data, using it to make their decisions, and having a vision for where to move forward.
That's incredible. When we take a step back and think about your own leadership journey that brought you to this point, do you feel like you've always thought this way as a leader? How did you compare yourself today with that first leadership assignment that you got?
I think that I've always been a collaborative leader, and I've always believed that if you can bring people to some common understandings that probably already exist in most of, you can have success. I also believe that success drives success, right? We can have that small success here that will lead to greater islands of success as we move on until that culture of success becomes the culture of our institution. And I think that we're seeing that happen here. And I think a lot of it has to do with caring and trust and principles, right? So being a principle-centered leader who cares about students and cares about staff and will listen to what people believe and pull up together. And then it's my job with my team to try and make sure that we have a direction that people agree that they can say, this is our direction, not it's his direction, it's our direction. And I think that's been the key to success. And having seen that go right and go wrong, the counterexamples and examples throughout my career, I started my teaching career here at Sonora High School in 1993 as a social studies teacher and a coach. Then I moved to Oakdale High, where I had some counterexamples in the site admin, but had district examples of very good leadership, and at the department level, excellent leadership. I was actually hired there to teach social studies and coach football. And the head football coach at the time was a gentleman named Mark Malone. And he retired the year after I started here. He retired as the superintendent of Oakdale Unified School District and was a great exemplar of a great leader, leading with integrity, but being a listener, being able to tell hard truths because everybody knew he cared about. That became a real example for me. You can tell people hard things if they know you care about. Then after being at Oakdale, I was lucky enough to come back here to Sonora, where then I taught for another about 7 years and went into administration. When I was administration here, I became an assistant principal. Terry Clark was our principal, and Dave Crocker was my co-assistant principal. He was definitely a very experienced administrator and was a wealth of knowledge for me. Dave went on to our alternative ed site, and Terry became a real leader in terms of focusing improvement efforts. For me, he brought us to Glendale, Arizona to see how they were using common assessment as the driving force in instructional change. We put a group together here, and that is probably the primary force in the district for then the next 20 years was building common assessments and doing the PLC work around those common assessments. Then I went to Columbia Elementary School District and was a principal there. It took a lot of those lessons into a smaller environment and really focused on data with a great group of teachers and counselors. We're able to look at our tier 1 improvement and really focus on what we were doing for each kid and using some technology. That was when we went to one-to-one digital devices there. And because of that, used Google Docs as it was a new item to very quickly update all the work we were doing on students so that while we're sitting in one room, because I know it's a lot to ask teachers to, hey, why don't you go off and tell me what you're doing with this student and write a report on the student, then come in and have this meeting. Instead, we would sit down with our Title I tech, June Wasserman, our counselor, Tina Cruz, and a teacher and myself. And the teacher would walk in and we'd start putting in the numbers. Okay, so how did so-and-so do on his testing? Okay, great. How's he doing in class? What interventions are working? And we would put that all into this document and we're constantly rolling it out so that we're seeing this on a regular basis. And before we were thinking about it, it was a cadence of accountability for each student that needed intervention. And so we were able to win a state award for that. Then I was really blessed to move to Ceres Unified School District, a place of lucky enough to have great leaders there. Dr. Scott Siegel was the superintendent at the time, and his driving message was keep the main thing. And the main thing for Ceres Unified was great instruction, and it was focused on direct instruction, on DI, as a real focus for the district. And to watch that carry down through the assistant soups and in a much larger district than I'd been in before, to see that carry all the way through was really a great learning journey for me. And that led me back here where I went to our human resources superintendent there, Denise Wickham, who's now retired as the superintendent of Ceres Unified, and going to her and saying, hey, there's this opportunity in Sonora to become the superintendent, to apply to be the superintendent. I don't know that I'm ready for that task. And she said, you are ready to do that. You've shown that here, and it's the perfect time and place for you. And that's a community. And I took her advice and applied for the position. It was lucky enough that the board selected me to have the privilege to steward this district for the time.
That's an incredible story, Ed. And one of the things that strikes me as I listen to you is how quickly you can recall all the various people that influence your leadership at every stage. And it's amazing to hear how peppered your journey has been with critical people to support you and to grow your leadership. Did you feel like, I actually want to be a leader over and above being an educator, aspire towards this, and I want to take on that next role?
What's interesting is I did not make a decision to be an assistant principal, to move into administration. That it was really something that just happened. An administrator left, an assistant principal left during the middle of a school year. Dave Crocker was the other assistant principal at the time. He said, hey, we're actually standing on the sidelines of a football game, watching a football game. Did you ever think about being an administrator? I said, and he said, I think you'd be good at it. And I said, okay. He said, it takes a lot of time. I said, okay. And he said, but not more than football season. Then the principal at the time, Mr. Hollingsworth, came over and Dave says to Mr. Hollingsworth, he said, what do you think of Ed as an assistant principal? And he says, I think he'd be pretty good. Then the superintendent shows up, Rob Gaskill. And this goes down this line. What do you think of Ed? He says, that's something you want to do? To try. And so that was it. A week later, he's got me enrolled in a program through Stanislaus State to become an administrator, and I step into the job. I will say, for me, the challenge was, I think I left the classroom too soon. I didn't leave the classroom a great teacher. I wasn't done teaching. I wasn't done coaching. It was too early. I mean, I was just over 30 years old, but when the opportunity is there, you have to take them. But I don't think that I knew that that was where I belonged. It wasn't until I left Sonora High School and went to the elementary school where I started to look around. I said, I put teaching and coaching behind me. I'm ready to lead. And this is what I want to do. And I think that was probably the moment when the student is ready, a teacher appears. I think then going to Ceres, I had just a multitude of great examples. Linda Stubbs, the principal at Sirius High when I got there, was a great example. And all of the district level admin were great supports.
It took essentially having to get out of a familiar environment into a new one with that new hat on, where there you started internalizing that identity as an administrator and as a leader. That's so amazing. And I think your story probably resonates with many other administrators who are listening in. It feels like maybe we should do a better job of succession planning. So many guests have shared almost the same thing, where it was a surprise and they were not actually looking for it. And I think as a whole, we could do better in preparing our next generation of leaders to step forward.
I would like to share one of the reasons I was able to step in this role with some confidence, the experience of my wife, Ed Pelfrey, who's the superintendent of Jamestown Elementary School District. She got some confidence to become a principal because I had become a principal. And then she became a superintendent. That gave me great confidence that I could do what a superintendent does. I have to say my greatest educational leadership inspiration is my wife, Contessa Pelfrey. There's no question about that she's the biggest inspiration for that. The other thing that inspires me on a daily basis was when I first came to Sonora High, I went out and I talked to trustees and I talked to staff members about what was working in the district and what wasn't. And one of the things that was said was working over and over again was our business office specialist, who was Kim Evans, that she had incredible integrity, was intelligent, people loved to work with her. And so when I came on, we were in the middle of also trying to find a CBO. And she stepped up from the district business office and applied for that job and has gone through all of her education, going through the ThinkMat training, going through the USC School of Business. And now she is a leader that I trust and that inspires me to do great things because of her integrity and her hard work. The same thing, I came on and there was an assistant principal named Karen Sells, who's now the principal of our high school. She inspires me because of her hard work and her integrity and her care for students and the staff. And then I was lucky enough to bring in another administrator, Robert Maben, who's the principal of our alternative ed site. Robert inspires me with his passion for his students and his staff. And it's great to have leaders around you that are better than you. I don't have any fear of a succession plan. I have people who I get to work with who are far more effective leaders than I am. And I consider myself very blessed.
That's incredible. And it's also a mark of a good leader. Surround yourself with people who you're surrounding yourself with a great team, essentially. Maybe one of the toughest jobs of a leader is to build and maintain great teams. And on that note, if you were addressing someone in education, maybe a little bit earlier in their leadership journey and thinking about taking the next step, how would you advise them within, say, a 30-second soundbite?
Could you be more specific? And what are we talking about in their education or in their career?
Let's say they're really early, they're an educator now, they've been toying with the idea of getting into administration, but are not sure and they don't know whether to take that next step or not.
I'll tell you that the main reason I'm in education was actually to coach football. And great educators had inspired me through sports, and they were great teachers who were also coaches and role models. The first two classes of students I was able to coach in football here at Sonora High School was a young man named Matt Hernandez. And Matt went into education, played college football. He gave me a call when he was probably 10 years into his career. And he said, I've been offered an opportunity to move into administration. What do you think? And my first question to him was, how old are your kids right now? And they were still pretty young. And I said, how much would the money make a difference for you and your family? And he said, well, probably wouldn't. We're doing fine. I said, do you want to be the superintendent of that district? And he said, no, that's not a goal. And I said, is this something you really want to do? And he says, well, people say I'd be good at it. And I said, Matt, I would wait till you're absolutely ready to go. You have to burn the boats. In the beginning of my career, I didn't burn the boats. I wasn't ready to cross the Rhine when the boats comes from Caesar going into Germany. He says, well, let's burn the boats and we won't retreat. And I think you have to do that as a teacher because you always have that feeling, I need to go back. Maybe I'm supposed to be teaching. I think one of the successes that my wife had moving into administration was she had great success in teaching. She'd been the leadership teacher. She coached successfully, all those things, great test scores. She was ready to move on. And I said to Matt, I'll tell you this, If you go across and you say, I'll go dabble in administration, and then you say, I don't want to do that anymore, and you back away, you're abandoning your team. And if you abandon your team once, you won't be asked back again, because administration requires hanging together to make sure that we're a team that's going to move forward. But if you say no now, the leadership will always be there. Wait till you're ready. And he said, wow, coach, nobody has said, wait. I felt like I've made a drastic mistake. I said, dude, Matt, just take everything I say with a grain of salt. It's my own experience and I care about you. So he did stay in the classroom and stayed doing all the things he was doing as a department chair, all those other activities. 2 years later, the LCAP came into existence. And he called me, he said, I've seen the perfect position now. There's an LCAP funded position that really focuses on achievement for special groups of students, for our unduplicated counts of students. And he said, I feel like this is exactly the right place. Kids are a little older. I feel like I have done everything I want to do as a teacher now. I'm ready to move. And he's an incredibly successful administrator in the Clovis Unified School District. And I think that's my advice. And I've just seen it play out once with somebody who I think has great ability. He would have been successful no matter when he did. But I think that making sure that you're done with your teaching and then it's time to move on, I think is a good piece of advice for people who go to.
I love that. You have to be mentally and emotionally ready to burn the boats and just fully commit to administration and leadership. That's such good advice. And thank you so much for joining us today, Ed, and being so generous with your stories and your sharing. Really appreciate you being on the show. For all of you listening, I really appreciate you as well. Thank you for listening. I hope you've gotten a nugget or 3 out of today's episode and can apply that in your own leadership journey. Until next time, this has been CT, and I'm signing off the Engaging Leadership Show. And that's all for the Engaging Leadership Show today. If these stories resonated with you at all, head over to engagingleadershipshow.com, all one word, where you can subscribe for free to receive more leadership stories and strategies every week. Also, at that link, you can access the archive of all the featured episodes we published in summary form. It's a veritable treasure trove of educational leadership wisdom distilled for your learning pleasure. Once again, the link is engagingleadershipshow.com. Sign up today to receive the next summary this very week. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and passion, and I'll see you in the next episode.